What does it take to defeat a city that believes it cannot fall? Imagine an island fortress rising out of the sea, its walls towering higher than any siege engine, its people confident that no army could ever touch them. That was Tyre in 332 BC, a city the ancient world whispered about with awe. Secure on its island, surrounded by water, and defended by fleets of powerful ships, Tyre was untouchable, or so they thought. But then came Alexander, a young king with a vision as vast as the horizon, a man who had never known defeat, and who refused to believe in the word impossible. When Alexander arrived at Tyre, the people mocked him. They laughed at his demand to enter their sacred temple. They told him he could not breach their walls. They believed the sea itself protected them. Yet Alexander's mind worked differently. Where others saw an unscalable barrier, he saw opportunity. Where others gave up, he invented. What unfolded was not just a battle. It was a test of will, of ingenuity, of sheer audacity. It became one of the most daring sieges in history, a story that would echo across centuries. How does a young king with no navy take down a city that rules the waves? How do you build a road across the sea when every stone you place is battered by storms and fire? And what happens when defiance meets unstoppable determination? This is not just the tale of a city under siege. It is the story of Alexander's genius, of human resolve against impossible odds. Stay with me as we uncover how the unconquerable Tyre was brought to its knees. Number 1. The island that defied the world. What kind of city dares to mock a conqueror who had never lost a battle? To answer that, we must first step into the world of Tyre. Picture it, a jewel of the Phoenician coast, sitting half a mile offshore, connected to the mainland only by the waves. Tyre was not just any city. It was the heart of Phoenician power, famed for its purple dye, its wealth, its fleet. Its merchants reached every corner of the Mediterranean, from the markets of Carthage to the temples of Egypt. Tyre was a city of seafarers, its people bound to the ocean, their walls built not just of stone, but of pride. By 332 BC, Tyre had stood for centuries. Empires had risen and fallen, yet Tyre endured. The Assyrians had tried to crush it, the Babylonians had tried to starve it, and even mighty Persia had bent before its maritime skill. Tyre had faced sieges before and survived them all. That history gave the Tyrians confidence, almost arrogance. They believed they were untouchable. So when Alexander arrived on their shores, Tyre's rulers listened to his demand that he be allowed to sacrifice at their temple of Melkart, a god they equated with Heracles. Alexander, ever conscious of symbolism, wanted recognition of his authority. But the Tyrians? They refused. Calmly, boldly, they told him, "If you wish to sacrifice, then do so on the mainland. You will not enter our island city." It was a refusal wrapped in defiance. To the Tyrians, it was nothing more than a slight gesture of independence. But to Alexander, it was an insult. He was a king who carried the weight of destiny, who marched with the belief that the gods themselves guided his steps. For Tyre to deny him entry was not just rejection, it was a challenge. And challenges were something Alexander never ignored. The stage was set. On one side, the proud city of Tyre, its walls rising sheer from the sea, daring anyone to touch them. On the other, Alexander, young, ambitious, and unwilling to be denied. What would happen when unstoppable met a movable stone? You may think you know the answer, but the first moves of this deadly game were anything but simple. Because Alexander did not have a fleet to challenge Tyre's ships. He did not have the means to scale their walls. He had only his mind, his men, and his relentless drive. So the question was this: how do you conquer the unconquerable? Alexander believed he had the answer, but it would require something no one had ever attempted before. Number 2. The road across the sea. How do you reach an island fortress with no ships? Alexander's answer was as bold as it was impossible: build the sea into land. His vision was staggering in its simplicity. If Tyre sat beyond the waves, then he would build a causeway, a massive stone bridge, stretching from the mainland all the way to the island. His engineers were stunned. The soldiers whispered in disbelief. But Alexander had decided, and when Alexander decided, men obeyed. The work began. Rocks were torn from quarries. Timber was dragged from forests. Thousands of men labored day and night, laying foundations beneath the sea. Slowly, steadily, a road began to grow across the waters. At first, it seemed almost miraculous, stone after stone sinking into the waves, a path pushing toward the unassailable city. But Tyre was watching, and Tyre was not idle. The Tyrian navy, swift and experienced, launched assaults against the workers. Fire ships, soaked in pitch and oil, were sent crashing into the causeway. Flames roared, consuming wood and drying men alive in fire. The sea itself seemed to rise against Alexander's plan, with storms battering the fragile structure, tearing at the work of weeks in a single night. Still, Alexander pressed on. Every setback was answered with new determination. He ordered the construction of towers on the causeway, massive siege towers, taller than the walls themselves, covered in rawhide to resist fire. From these towers, his men rained arrows and stones on Tyrian ships, pushing back the naval assaults. The causeway crept closer, inch by inch, foot by foot, until the walls of Tyre loomed larger on the horizon. For the first time, the Tyrians felt a chill of unease. Perhaps their city was not as untouchable as they believed. But Tyre had not yet shown its full strength, and Alexander had not yet faced the true fury of the sea. The battle of will was only beginning. Number 3. Fire on the water. What happens when determination meets fire and fury? The Tyrians were about to show Alexander. As the causeway stretched closer, the Tyrians launched their boldest strike. They filled one of their largest ships with dry wood, pitch, and sulfur, creating a floating inferno. With the wind at their backs, they set it alight and sent it hurtling toward Alexander's siege towers. The flames exploded in a roar, engulfing the towers, collapsing their great wooden frames. Soldiers leapt into the sea, burning or drowning as the inferno consumed weeks of labor in minutes. For the Tyrians, it was a triumph. The sea boiled with fire, and Alexander's men reeled back in shock. Surely now he would abandon his mad plan. Surely now Tyre was safe. But Alexander did not break. Rage flared within him, but so did resolve. If fire destroyed his towers, then he would build new ones. If storms tore down his causeway, then he would lay fresh stone. To give up was unthinkable. His army had come too far, conquered too much, to retreat before the pride of Tyre. And so the work began again. Stronger towers rose. The causeway thickened, reinforced with heavier stone. More ships were seized from allies, pressed into service to guard the laborers. The battle became one not of swords alone, but of endurance. Tyre struck again and again, yet Alexander rebuilt each time. The sea was no longer a shield. It had become a battlefield. And Alexander was learning, adapting, turning the impossible into reality. But the Tyrians still had one advantage. Their fleet ruled the waters. Until Alexander could match them at sea, his causeway would always be vulnerable. The question now was clear. How could a general with no navy defeat the greatest seafarers of the age? Alexander had an answer, one that would change the course of the siege forever. Number 4. The conqueror builds a navy. How does a man without ships defeat the masters of the sea? That was the puzzle Alexander now faced. The Tyrians believed they had him cornered. They had burned his towers, harassed his causeway, and controlled the waters with their fleet. As long as the sea belonged to Tyre, Alexander's dream of conquest would sink beneath the waves. But Alexander was never one to accept limitations. He understood something crucial. Power was not only about what you had, but about what you could seize. And so he turned to the surrounding ports, cities, and kingdoms. Many of them were already subdued, bound by either fear or loyalty to Alexander. From Sidon, from Cyprus, from conquered Phoenician harbors, ships began to arrive. One by one, sails appeared on the horizon, not as enemies, but as allies. Alexander did not build his own fleet. He assembled one from the spoils of conquest and the loyalty of those who dared not oppose him. Soon, hundreds of ships flew his banner. Galleys, triremes, supply vessels, the very tools of naval power that Tyre once believed to be their exclusive strength. The irony was sharp. Tyre's own kinsmen, fellow Phoenicians, now stood against her. Alexander had turned Tyre's world upside down. With a fleet under his command, The siege changed overnight. Now the island was surrounded not only by stone from the causeway, but by sails from every direction. Tyre, once the queen of the seas, was trapped in her own waters. But the Tyrians were not without fight. They launched sudden raids, striking Alexander's fleet with deadly precision, sinking ships and retreating swiftly behind their walls. The sea echoed with the crash of rams, the scream of men, the thunder of boarding clashes. And yet, for every loss Alexander endured, he pressed harder, driving his fleet closer to the city's harbors. The people of Tyre felt the shift. For the first time, their walls seemed less invincible. Supplies grew scarce. Anxiety spread. But they still had faith in their gods, in their strength, and in their walls that towered 150 feet above the waves. Alexander's men, however, were restless. The causeway was slow. The battles at sea were costly, and morale wavered. To many, the siege seemed endless, impossible. Why risk everything for one stubborn city when the empire of Persia still awaited? The answer lay not just in strategy, but in Alexander's pride. To retreat from Tyre was unthinkable. To leave an insult unanswered would tarnish his legend. And so he told his men, "This city will fall, no matter the cost." The fleet was ready. The causeway stretched almost to the walls. The stage was set for one of the greatest assaults the ancient world had ever seen. But Tyre had one last, desperate card to play. And when they struck, it nearly turned Alexander's dream to ash. Number 5. The Tyrian counterstrike. Can the hunted become the hunter? Tyre was about to prove it. The Tyrians knew they could not win a war of attrition. Alexander's causeway grew daily. His fleet swelled with allies, and his determination never faltered. So they chose boldness, the kind that turns defense into attack. One summer morning, as Alexander's ships patrolled the waters, the Tyrians slipped out of their harbors with a sudden fury. Their galleys, sleek and swift, struck hard against the weakest point of Alexander's blockade. They rammed ships, splintered oars, and boarded decks in a frenzy of steel and blood. The sea boiled with chaos. For a moment, panic swept Alexander's lines. His fleet, newly gathered, lacked the seamless coordination of Tyre's seasoned sailors. The Tyrians exploited every weakness, every hesitation. Dozens of Alexander's ships went down in flames or were driven onto the rocks. And then came the most audacious strike. From their towers, the Tyrians hurled chains into Alexander's siege engines on the causeway. They pulled the machines toward the walls, setting them ablaze under a hail of arrows. Fire and smoke swallowed the causeway once more. Men screamed as they were crushed beneath falling beams. It was as if the gods themselves had breathed fire upon Alexander's plans. His army reeled. His fleet staggered. For a heartbeat, it seemed Tyre might truly resist the conqueror. But Alexander was never one to linger in despair. He rode through the chaos, rallying his men, shouting above the roar of battle. He ordered his ships into tighter formations, directing them with ruthless precision. Slowly, painfully, he wrested order from disaster. The Tyrians, though triumphant in the moment, had failed to achieve the one thing they needed most: total destruction of Alexander's fleet. They retreated, battered but alive, back behind their walls. The balance shifted again. Tyre had wounded Alexander, but not broken him, and Alexander's response would be merciless. From this moment forward, the siege was no longer about strategy alone. It became a contest of wills, a struggle between a city's desperate pride and a king's unshakable resolve. And in contests of will, Alexander was unmatched. The question now was no longer if Tyre would fall, but how much blood it would cost. Number 6. The storming of the walls. What does it look like when an impossible dream becomes reality? On the shores of Tyre, the world was about to witness it. After months of struggle, fire, storms, counterattacks, Alexander's causeway finally reached the island. His fleet, reinforced and organized, ringed Tyre in a deadly noose. Supplies no longer flowed freely into the city. Desperation gnawed at the Tyrians. And then came the day. Alexander ordered the assault. The great siege towers rolled forward across the causeway, their ironclad rams pounding the walls. From his fleet, ships surged forward, ladders and bridges ready to throw against Tyre's defenses. The air filled with the whine of arrows, the crash of catapults, the roar of men locked in struggle. At first, Tyre held. Stones rained down from above, crushing Alexander's soldiers as they tried to climb. Oil poured in sheets of fire, setting siege engines ablaze. The defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew there was no escape, no second chance. But Alexander had prepared. His fleet struck in unison, attacking from multiple directions. While one wall crumbled under relentless rams, ladders rose on another. His men surged upward, shield to shield, inch by bloody inch. Then, with a thunderous crack, a section of wall gave way. The breach was open. Alexander himself was among the first to charge, driving his men into the gap. Battle raged through the streets, as Tyrians fought from every corner, every rooftop. Women and children screamed as the invaders poured in. It was no longer a siege. It was a slaughter. Alexander's rage was unleashed. For every setback Tyre had caused him, for every insult, every fire, every lost soldier, the conqueror demanded payment in blood. Thousands were cut down. Thousands more were enslaved. The city that believed itself unconquerable lay broken, its walls shattered, its people chained. Tyre had defied the greatest conqueror of the age and paid the price. But what did this victory mean for Alexander's destiny? The fall of Tyre was more than a conquest. It was a statement, one that the entire world would hear. Number 7. The wrath of Alexander. What happens when patience is tested too far? For Alexander, Tyre had crossed the line. By the time the walls fell, months of frustration, humiliation, and relentless labor had hardened his heart. The city that mocked him, that burned his towers, that dared to resist, was no longer just an obstacle. It was a symbol, and symbols must be destroyed. When his men burst through the breach, Alexander did not order restraint. He did not offer mercy. What followed was one of the bloodiest episodes of his entire career. Soldiers cut down civilians in the streets, sparing neither women nor children. Blood filled the gutters, bodies lay in heaps against the walls, and the once proud city echoed with screams. Those who fled to the temples found no sanctuary. Even sacred places were not safe from Alexander's wrath. Flames consumed buildings that had stood for centuries. Tyre, the jewel of the sea, was reduced to rubble and ash. And the punishments did not end with the sword. Of the survivors, some 30,000 men, women, and children were sold into slavery, scattered to the winds, never to see their homes again. 2,000 of Tyre's soldiers, those who had resisted most fiercely, were crucified along the shore. Their bodies lined the coast, a gruesome warning to any city that might dare defy Alexander's will. Was this cruelty, or was it strategy? That question haunted the ancient world. To Alexander, it was both vengeance and message. His empire could not be built on hesitation. Resistance had to be crushed so thoroughly that no one else would dare attempt it. And Tyre's fate achieved exactly that. Cities that heard of its destruction opened their gates rather than risk the same. Yet even as the fires consumed Tyre, whispers spread among Alexander's men. Was their king becoming something more than human, or something less? His wrath seemed larger than life, divine to some, monstrous to others. The world had seen Alexander the Conqueror. Now it had seen Alexander the Destroyer. And still, his ambition burned brighter than ever. But the question lingered. How far could such wrath carry him before it consumed him too? Number 8. The price of defiance. Was Tyre's defiance worth the cost? That question has echoed through the centuries. For the Tyrians, the answer was written in blood and chains. Their city, once the pride of the Mediterranean, lay broken. Their families were scattered. Their gods, once thought to protect them, had failed to stop Alexander's fury. The people of Tyre paid the ultimate price for their pride, the belief that their walls and their fleet could shield them from destiny. But history is never simple. In their resistance, the Tyrians also left a legacy of defiance. They stood against the greatest conqueror of their age and forced him into one of the most grueling campaigns of his career. They showed the world that Tyre was no mere city. It was a fortress of spirit as much as of stone. For Alexander, the price was measured differently. He won Tyre, but at tremendous cost. His men were exhausted. His resources were drained. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of his soldiers lay dead, their bodies buried in the rubble of the causeway or beneath the waves. Months of precious time were lost, time that might have been spent pursuing Darius, the king of Persia, who even then was gathering strength. And yet, Alexander would not have traded the victory. Tyre was more than a city. It was a statement to the world. No wall was too high, no sea too deep, no fortress beyond his reach. By breaking Tyre, Alexander announced himself as not merely a conqueror of land, but of the impossible. The causeway he built remained long after the battle was over. In time, sand and silt covered it, turning Tyre into a peninsula instead of an island. Even today, the mark of Alexander's can be seen on the map itself, geography reshaped by determination. But victory came with shadows. The cruelty shown to the Tyrians left scars on Alexander's reputation. Some saw him as a hero, favored by the gods. Others saw a tyrant who crucified thousands in cold blood. The line between legend and horror grew thinner. So, was the price of defiance too high? For Tyre, the answer was destruction. For Alexander, it was both glory and infamy. And for the world, it was a lesson. To resist Alexander was to gamble with annihilation. But this was not the end. Tyre was but one chapter in a story far greater, a story of a man who sought to conquer not just cities, but the world itself. Number 9. The turning point of empire. Why does the fall of one city matter in the march of empires? Because Tyre was more than stone and sea. It was a turning point. Before Tyre, Alexander's victories had been swift, dazzling, almost effortless. From Greece to Asia Minor, he crushed armies and took cities with speed that stunned the world. But Tyre was different. Tyre resisted. Tyre forced him into a long, brutal siege where ingenuity, endurance, and sheer will were tested to the limit. And Alexander passed that test. When Tyre fell, the message to the east was unmistakable. If even the strongest island fortress could not stand, what hope did the Persian Empire have? Cities along the coast surrendered without a fight. Ports opened their gates. Fleets joined Alexander rather than oppose him. The path to Egypt lay clear. In this way, Tyre became the hinge on which Alexander's empire turned. With the city destroyed, he commanded the Mediterranean coastline. Persia's naval power was broken. The sea, once Tyre's greatest weapon, now belonged to him. But the siege also marked a change within Alexander himself. He had shown not only brilliance, but ruthlessness. His cruelty at Tyre revealed a darker side, one that would surface again in the years ahead. The conqueror who once sought glory now sought dominance, and the line between the two blurred. His men saw it, the world saw it, and history would never forget it. The siege of Tyre was more than a battle, it was a crucible. It shaped Alexander into the kind of leader who would march into Egypt, face Darius at Gaugamela, and dream of reaching the ends of the earth. But that same crucible also forged the shadows that would haunt him: pride, wrath, and the belief that nothing was beyond his grasp. And as every empire in history has shown, such beliefs are both the fire of greatness and the seed of downfall. Number 10. The legacy of an impossible siege. What does it mean to conquer the unconquerable? That is the question the fall of Tyre leaves behind. For Alexander, the siege was not simply another victory. It was a defining moment. Tyre was supposed to be untouchable, an island fortress, a city that had resisted empires for centuries. To break it was to prove that there were no limits to his ambition, no barriers his will could not overcome. The causeway he built across the sea was more than stone. It was a monument to human ingenuity. Where the world saw water, he saw a path. Where others saw impossibility, he saw opportunity. That vision, that audacity, became the heart of his legend. Historians and storytellers across ages look back at Tyre and said, here was proof that Alexander was no ordinary king. He was something greater. But legacy is never simple. Alongside his brilliance came his brutality. The crucifixions, the enslavement, the slaughter, these too are part of the story. They reveal a man who was not only a visionary, but also merciless when crossed. To his followers, that ruthlessness was strength. To his enemies, it was terror. Tyre itself never fully recovered. Once the jewel of Phoenicia, it became a warning etched into the memory of nations. Its merchants scattered, its power broken. The purple dye that once symbolized wealth and royalty was overshadowed by the red of blood spilled on its streets. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, Tyre did achieve immortality, not as an unconquerable city, but as the city that tested Alexander and revealed his true nature. Every empire has its proving ground, and for Alexander, Tyre was his. Without Tyre, perhaps the march into Egypt would have been slower. Perhaps Darius would have rallied more allies. Perhaps Alexander's empire would never have stretched so far, so fast. The siege was costly, but it cemented his path to becoming the master of the known world. And so, the legacy of Tyre is twofold: the brilliance of human will against impossible odds, and the reminder of the cost of defiance. When we look at that causeway today, still visible, still binding the island to the mainland, we see the mark of Alexander's vision carved into the earth itself. Centuries have passed, empires have risen and fallen, but the road across the sea remains. It whispers a story to us, of a king who would not be denied, of a city that dared to resist, and of a siege that changed the course of history. So what does it mean to conquer the unconquerable? Perhaps it means that greatness is forged in the struggle against the impossible. Or perhaps it means that even the mightiest victories carry shadows that never fade. The legacy of Tyre is not just Alexander's triumph. It is also a question for us. What price are we willing to pay to overcome the walls that stand in our way? Conclusion. The siege of Tyre was more than a clash between a king and a city. It was a battle between pride and determination, between walls of stone and willpower unyielding. In the end, Alexander triumphed, but the cost was staggering, in blood, in cruelty, in time. For Tyre, it was the end of an era. The city that had believed itself eternal was broken in a single summer. Its people scattered, its power crushed, its name forever linked not to glory, but to defeat. For Alexander, it was both victory and transformation. He proved to the world, and to himself, that nothing was beyond his reach. But he also revealed a darker truth, that his ambition carried a price not only for his enemies, but for his own soul. And for us, centuries later, the story of Tyre remains a mirror. It asks us whether greatness is worth the sacrifices it demands. It asks us what it means to face the impossible, and whether, like Alexander, we too would dare to build a road across the sea. The siege of Tyre is gone, but its echoes still remind us. Walls may stand high, seas may divide, yet human will is the most powerful force of all.